Eliza stood alone in the dimly lit kitchen, the cold air wrapping around her like an unwelcome shroud. The bottle of wine on the counter, half empty and tasting faintly off, mirrored the subtle bitterness that had slowly crept into her life. It wasn't just the wine. It was the silence that filled the room, thick and heavy, pressing down on her chest as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She glanced over at the worn wooden table, where just moments ago her husband had sat. But now, he was somewhere else, physically present yet emotionally distant, a ghost drifting through the spaces of their shared life. 10 years. 10 years of marriage that had slowly eroded into quiet routine, where conversations were reduced to necessities and laughter had become a rare, fragile visitor. The house felt empty despite the things in it, like a hollow shell that once held warmth and now only memories. In the stillness, Eliza's mind wandered through the labyrinth of her emotions. She remembered the early days, the spark, the promises whispered in the dark, the dreams they once shared. But time had a way of stripping away illusions, revealing the stark truth beneath. Her husband, once so vibrant and attentive, had become a man who looked through her rather than at her, whose presence was felt more as a shadow than as a partner. Yet within this quiet despair, a hidden ember of hope flickered. It was fragile, easily smothered by the weight of loneliness, but it was there, an unspoken yearning for something deeper, something real. Eliza longed not just for connection, but for understanding, for a love that could still surprise her, even after all these years. She craved a renewal of spirit, a breaking free from the invisible chains that bound her heart to a life half-lived. As she poured the leftover wine down the drain, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, to acknowledge the aching void inside her. The silence was deafening, but it was also a canvas, blank and waiting. Somewhere in that quiet, Eliza held onto the possibility that her story was not finished, that the emptiness might one day be filled with something more than memories. The stillness of Eliza's quiet household shattered the moment Liam, her husband's younger brother, stepped through the door. Unlike his older brother's steady, composed presence, Liam was a whirlwind, a free spirit whose laughter echoed like a contagious melody, breathing a restless energy into the air. Where once there was routine and silent restraint, now the walls seemed to pulse with life, unpredictability, and a hint of wildness. Liam was not merely a contrast. He was a force of nature that disrupted the carefully constructed calm Eliza had come to accept. His carefree demeanor, the way he tossed aside convention with ease, stirred something deep inside her, a part long buried beneath years of quiet compliance and hidden desires. His chaotic charm was a stark mirror to the stillness that had become her shield, and in that contrast, Eliza found herself both unsettled and inexplicably drawn. That evening, Liam organized an intimate gathering in the cozy confines of the family home, a gathering filled with laughter, music, and the low hum of conversation. The room was a vibrant stage for connection and subtle tension alike. Among Liam's friends was Mason, whose quiet confidence and warm gaze caught Eliza off guard. He was different from the others, not flashy or loud, but his presence felt steady and sincere, like a gentle current stirring beneath the surface. As the night unfolded, the playful chaos Liam created acted as both a distraction and a catalyst. Eliza's usual calm cracked just enough for something fragile yet powerful to flicker between her and Mason. It was in the brief glances exchanged over clinking glasses, the accidental brush of hands, and the quiet moments amid the laughter that an unspoken energy began to weave itself around her heart. Liam's disruptive spirit was not just an agent of turmoil, it was also a spark of joy and awakening. Through his infectious laughter and fearless embrace of life, he shattered the stillness Eliza had hidden behind, allowing long-suppressed emotions to rise, emotions of longing, excitement, and the fragile hope of something new. The chaotic energy of the night was a sharp contrast to her internal silence, and in that contrast lay the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself and her desires. That evening, The air in the room was thick with something unspoken, an invisible current pulsing between Eliza and Mason that neither dared to name aloud. The gathering buzzed around them, laughter and music weaving a lively backdrop, yet within their shared space, time seemed to slow, the world narrowing down to stolen glances and subtle exchanges. Eliza stood by the window, the soft glow of the streetlights casting a halo around her, making her seem almost ethereal. Mason watched her from across the room, his eyes tracing every small movement, the way her fingers lightly curled around the rim of her glass, the delicate tilt of her head as she smiled to herself. Each gesture was a whisper of something deeper, a secret conversation without words. Their eyes met briefly, and in that instant, the air charged with an unspoken promise. It wasn't bold declarations or fiery confessions, but a delicate dance of restraint and desire. The silence between them was louder than any spoken word, filled with yearning and the ache of what remained unsaid. Mason took a small step closer, his heart pounding, almost daring himself to bridge the distance. Eliza caught the motion out of the corner of her eye and turned just enough to meet him halfway, but neither spoke. The magnetic pull was undeniable, yet the weight of unspoken truths held them in place, tangled between fear and hope, between what was and what could be. Their smiles were soft but laden with meaning, a quiet understanding that this moment was both everything and nothing. It was a fragile thread connecting two souls who longed for more but were bound by the invisible chains of circumstance, hesitation, and the unknown. As the night deepened, the tension remained, unresolved yet intensely felt. They existed in a suspended breath, caught in the delicate space between possibility and restraint. When the evening finally drew to a close, they parted without words, carrying the heavy weight of what might have been, their hearts still speaking volumes in the silence that lingered long after. The morning light filtered softly through the thin curtains, casting pale stripes across Eliza's face. The quiet stillness of the room seemed to amplify the heaviness she felt deep inside, a weight born not just from sleep deprivation, but from the ache of a night that had left her heart unsettled. The night with Mason lingered in her mind like a half-remembered dream, full of yearning that had danced so close to fulfillment, yet slipped away with the dawn. She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching a glass of water, her thoughts swirling in a storm of conflicting emotions. There was a bittersweetness to it all, the tender brush of Mason's touch, the almost spoken promises, the electricity between them that never quite ignited into the fire she longed for. And then the silence after he left, a quiet void, echoing louder than words ever could. Her heart ached with a longing she hadn't allowed herself to fully recognize before. It was the longing not only for Mason, but for a version of herself she'd pushed aside, the woman who craved more than routine, more than duty, more than the predictable safety of her life. This newfound awareness settled uneasily in her chest, bringing with it a mix of excitement and guilt, hope and fear. The door creaked open and Liam stepped in, his presence warm but distant. His smile was gentle, his voice calm, but Eliza sensed the gulf between them, the things left unsaid, the emotions masked behind everyday pleasantries. Liam's words didn't reach the turmoil within her. He spoke to the Eliza everyone else knew, not the one wrestling with her own truth in the quiet aftermath of the night. Later, when her husband joined her for breakfast, the contrast was even more pronounced. They sat side by side, a silence thick enough to suffocate. The years of shared memories, the routines, the vows, they all felt like fragile walls closing in around her, trapping her between duty and desire. The conversation was polite but hollow, a reminder of the emotional distance growing between them. In these moments, Eliza confronted the complexity of her feelings, the guilt that gnawed at her conscience, the loneliness that no familiar face could fill, and the deep, unspoken yearning for something more authentic. It was a painful awakening, but one that sparked a quiet resolve. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to acknowledge her own needs, her own desires, not just as fleeting whims, but as essential parts of who she was. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with inner conflict, but Eliza knew that this moment of self-discovery was the first step toward reclaiming her own happiness. Eliza stood at the edge of everything she thought she knew, feeling the invisible threads that had quietly woven through her life begin to tremble beneath her skin. It was as if the story she had lived was not just a series of events, but a delicate tapestry of silent connections, moments, glances, and unspoken words that, until now, had remained unseen. These threads pulled at her heart, revealing the hidden emotional currents that shaped her world. In the days and nights that followed her reckoning, Eliza's relationships began to shift in ways subtle but profound. She noticed how the familiar warmth in her conversations sometimes carried an unspoken tension, a secret longing that neither she nor those around her dared to name aloud. It was in the pause between sentences, the catch in a voice, the hesitation before a smile. These nuances became clearer to her as she peeled back the layers of her own heart. Inside, a transformation was quietly unfolding. Eliza felt herself awakening, not in the dramatic, sweeping sense of a sudden revelation, but in the slow, persistent stirring of emotions long buried beneath the surface. Love, she realized, was not a single, straightforward path, but a complex landscape of desire, fidelity, and freedom. It was messy and beautiful, tangled with contradictions that challenged everything she had believed. Secrecy hovered like a shadow, both protective and imprisoning. It guarded fragile hopes and concealed fears, yet it also isolated her from the full truth of herself and others. In this silence, Eliza wrestled with a deep yearning, a longing for connection, for honesty, for the courage to face the unknown parts of her soul. As she stood at this crossroads, Eliza's thoughts turned outward, beyond herself and her immediate circle. What did it mean, she wondered, to love freely without losing oneself? How could she honor the ties that bound her while also embracing the wild, uncharted freedom that whispered from just beyond her reach? This moment, suspended in uncertainty and hope, was not an ending but an invitation. It called not only to Eliza, but to every heart willing to listen, to reflect on the silent yearnings we all carry, the hidden threads that shape our lives in unseen ways, and the bravery required to confront them, to walk forward, uncertain yet resolute, into the unfolding story that lies just ahead.